about the way big-budget movies produce low-budget knockoffs. We're familiar with the process by which Raiders of the Lost Ark becomes being from another planet. The monetary and cultural dynamics of these transactions are easy to understand. A successful film inspires imitators who hope to duplicate its success. Rarer and harder to grasp is the inverse, times when the cheap, forgotten movie seems to spark a trend, or at least foretell it. Zombie Nightmare has proven to be just such a prescient title, which is eerie considering its supernatural subject matter. Having grown bored of Romero's vision of the undead as contagion, we've since witnessed a sudden resurgence in voodoo movies. Child's Play, a comedy slasher about a murderous doll given life by a witch doctor's spell, becomes a cult hit. Other outings are a little more morose. There's John Schlesinger's The Believers, a brooding and somber piece starring Martin Sheen, and Wes Craven's genuinely unnerving The Serpent in the Rainbow. This year's proving gloomy in general, as demonstrated by the Best Picture win handed to Platoon, Oliver Stone's weepy Vietnam biopic. It's been a long decade of Central American interventions, DC checkpoints, and proxy wars. Nevertheless, we press on, at least in Hollywood's imagination. This May, the Rambo franchise migrates west from Vietnam to Afghanistan for Rambo 3, in which John fights the treacherous Soviets alongside the heroic child soldiers of the Mujahideen. This is a fundamentalist guerrilla group whom the CIA is secretly aiding in an effort to destabilize the Soviet Union. It couldn't be that much of a secret if they're making movies about it. Also this summer, the USS Vincennes, patrolling the Persian Gulf, shoots down Flight 655, an Iranian airliner with 260 souls aboard. The gory incident escalates ever-sweltering Middle East tensions to crisis levels. Under Reagan, the military is solidifying its global grip, its overseas bases rising in number to 794. War is everywhere and nowhere and knocking at the door. It threatens to rise up from the southern border, explode in fuel crisis sparked halfway around the globe, or erupt in nuclear holocaust. This last threat hangs in the air constantly like a grating hum. Popular culture has turned a curious amalgam of grim and farcical, which might be fitting in a world where a movie star become president is shooting down commercial airplanes. Thus, we alight on Hobgoblins, episode 907. This is also a horror comedy, this time about a deserted movie lot infested with tiny mind-reading creatures. With the recent success of Ghostbusters, Gremlins, and Critters, imitators will keep coming until every fiend in the D&D monster manual has been turned into a feature film, it seems. And one suspects director-writer Rick Sloane happened on the word Hobgoblins somewhere and then worked up his conceit around it. Forget the neo-realist grit of Hellcats and Girl in Gold Boots, 1968, episode 1002. The biker picture comes with a ready-made mise-en-scène, but the sword and sorcery and fantasy fads have forced low-budget producers to finance sets and costumes. This is how we wound up with Cave Dwellers. For all its aspirations to Hugo Award-winning science fiction, Overdrawn at the Memory Bank, 1983, episode 822, is shot on video. As Grindhouse succumbs to the direct-to-VHS model for B-movie distribution, and Hitchcock makes way for Spielberg in the A-movie game, cheap movies today don't look verite and minimalist, they just look cheap. And Hobgoblins takes it to another level. This is barely a movie at all. It doesn't even feel like a student project stretched out to 90 minutes. It's more like a prank or the result of a bet between brash young men, a la Manos, The Hands of Fate, 1966, episode 424, but lacking even Manos' musty sense of mystery. Still, as with Overdrawn, there's some high-mindedness in Hobgoblins. Like most smart movie makers on a budget, Rick Sloane wisely steals only from the best by lifting the part of his premise not inspired by Gremlins from Woody Allen's 1985, The Purple Rose of Cairo. Here, Allen dims the line between fantasy and reality through the art of film in particular, having his disillusioned heroine fall in love with a leading man whom the cinema has made flesh, literally, as in he walks out of the screen and into the audience. Lamberto Bava's slightly less highbrow Demons came out the same year as Cairo and uses the same gimmick, but to a very different end. As a successful low-budget horror, though, Demons only makes the same point from a different angle. One of a spate of gory Italian zombie knockoffs to ride the coattails of George Romero, Demons has the zombies tear through the movie screen's canvas to devour the theater's audience. This is reminiscent of the opening scene in Dawn of the Dead, in which the undead tackle a TV station while they're live on the air. As the media overtake us, they're at risk of being overtaken too. But Bava's zombies don't shuffle around lazily like Romero's. They're spry. They leap over rows of seats, run down their hapless prey like track athletes, and have superhuman strength. Rick Sloane more resembles Bava than Romero in this regard. His hobgoblins are cunning and sly, and though they lack the demons' size, they do just as good a job of messing with everyone's minds. Hobgoblins is structured like your basic slasher. Carousing youngsters fall victim to the hobgoblins in series as the impish creatures take control of the teens' impressionable minds and turn them against themselves or one another. This the beasties do by creating their wildest fantasy, that is, projecting their idealized self-image over their true ones. Thanks to the hobgoblins, working stiff Dennis does an imaginary number as a rock singer and falls off a movie soundstage to his death. Amorous but plain Kyle thinks himself an impresario and nearly allows a would-be love interest to murder him, and so on. This is definitely a case of a big idea coming in a small package. Lamberto Bava and Woody Allen, working separately, fumble in their parallel efforts to reconcile the relationship between audience and movie screen. For Bava, the theater's a trap, and the state of spectatorship a uniquely unguarded one. And he has precedent. Recall the mess hall at Mytho, the soldiers set on by gunfire while watching a movie. But there's little room for sentiment or the appeal of cinema. Allen, meanwhile, is all sentiment. His idyllic Cairo romanticizes the movies, only scarcely referencing the potential of media to do harm. It takes a plop of pop cultural detritus like Hobgoblins to get it right. Cinema's sentimental appeal is the threat. Advertising may feed on narcissism and fear. In the good cop, bad cop routine of a typical TV break, "You deserve a break today" might follow, "What would your children do if you died tomorrow?" But film's power to stoke the Scylla and Charybdis of self-involvement and psychopathy remains unrivaled. Consider Walking Tall or Rambo's potential to fill moviegoers with righteous anger, stoke the audience until they rejoice in murder. Remember The Breakfast Club's sad message of loneliness and futility. The geek, the jock, the princess, all divided, transfixed by their own isolated lives and problems, suffering inwardly and bullying those around them. Then recall the power with which Breakfast Club delivered its message, the sheer weight of what Lee from Enter the Dragon might call its emotional content. Psychoanalysts have long had ideas about emotional appeals of this sort. The meditation on narcissism that's most applicable here is maybe Jacques Lacan's theory of the mirror phase. Adapted from Freud's developmental stages, the oral phase, the anal phase, and so on. The mirror phase imagines the very young child seeing her reflection for the first time since developing a sense of herself as being autonomous from her mother. Having only a rudimentary understanding of her sensorium, the child grasps the image as herself, but also something outside herself. To this exterior aspect of the image, the child automatically attaches emotionally charged perceptions and beliefs. This means, for instance, that to the extent she thinks pridefully of herself, due, Freud would likely have had it, to adequate love from the mother and proper familial guardianship from the father, the images she sees will be inflated in poise and stature. To the extent love has been absent and peril present in her young life, guilt and fear rather than pride will shape her self-image. This will diminish it. The self-image then has a quality of unreality about it from the outset, a quality of fraudulence and self-deception. Most of us have learned one way or another that a distorted view of oneself can have a variety of consequences.
It seemed harmless at first.
Mr. McCready, the movie Lot's Watchman and guardian of the Hobgoblins, recalls,
Watching everyone around me becoming rich, famous. But for most people, what they really want in life can be very dangerous.
Interestingly, he ascribes no ill intent to the creatures.
I still don't know if
He wonders aloud,
they figured they were doing good for people or not.
it's like asking whether John Calhoun, keeper of the mouse utopia, meant to do a good turn for the mice. Spawned by the Egbert case, the anti-D&D movement has been gathering steam. Adherents generally espouse various theories about D&D's mind-bending nature, its wicked tendency to absorb the consciousness of impressionable youth, who would presumably be better off endlessly watching simulated murders on television like the rest of us. While the anti-D&D crowd condemns role-playing gamers for confusing fantasy and reality, in general, gamers grasp reality perfectly well and also understand how tough it is. Role-playing games can help gamers cope. This point is illustrated in the tale of the pseudonymous Mallory, a clinical depressive who discovered in role-playing games a means of dealing with her illness. In this case, the game played isn't D&D, a patriarchal fantasy of adolescent male conquest, according to study author John Hughes, but Call of Cthulhu, a more recent RPG based around the Gothico splatter oeuvre of H.P. Lovecraft. Focused less on combat gameplay and more on politics and discovery, Call of Cthulhu has an open-ended game structure that, as Hughes explains, seeks to explore the existential dilemma of 20th century humanity. In Mallory's case, this dilemma has to do with gender roles. I feel I was brought up with a very negative image of femininity, she explains. Women had to be passive, they had to wait for what they wanted, they weren't allowed to initiate anything. When all the priorities came out, you were last on the list. This has created an impasse in Mallory's inner emotional and intellectual life because no gender identity feels quite comfortable to her. No role quite fits. She's ill at ease not living up to people's expectations of womanhood, not fitting a role stereotype in an appropriate way, or fitting a role stereotype in an appropriate way. And this catch-22 has made her depressed, particularly as she went to college and got married. In playing Jack, a character Mallory uses in the Cthulhu game as well as more traditional sword and sorcery RPGs she also participates in, she's begun rearranging her conception of gender and freeing herself from these unreasonable prohibitions on her being and behavior. Jack is impulsive, largely unafraid of danger, and an initiator, qualities Mallory associates with maleness. But he's also bisexual and has a caring and maternal attitude. Identifying with this androgynous character has led Mallory to confront her unconscious attitudes about gender separation. Mallory emotionally explored the implications of the Jack symbol and gradually came to realize that Jack was an extension of herself, a symbol of self, and a symbol of both her condition and cure. Jack has become a part of Mallory that she can examine as though it were an external object, but she nevertheless often identifies with Jack as though she were experiencing game events in his place. When her fellow gamers, his characters, have saved Jack's life during a campaign scenario, she describes a sense of camaraderie as though they'd saved her, not a representation of her. Mallory became a gamer on the Australian RPG convention circuit, and by the end of Hughes' study, she was managing her depression if she hadn't cured it. The Jack character that provided her with such profound insight was inspired, like so much these days, by the movies. His prototype, Mallory confesses, is Jack Salyers, David Bowie's character in 1983's Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence. D&D and its adjuncts in the role-playing world are going strong, but the sword and sorcery movie is starting to look a little ratty around the edges. A third follow-up to the Conan series, Conan the Conqueror, never materializes, and Conan's lookalikes are becoming crass and derivative. Even as role players are taking tabletop gaming to new heights of diversity, fantasy films are preaching more and more a language of exclusion. Highlander, the first feature film by keynote music video director Russell Mulcahy, revolves around the premise of a winner-take-all contest among immortals. It's yet another variation on the most dangerous game, but unfolding in the same faux medieval alternative history we've seen many times by now. The game's contestants sometimes form allegiances of convenience, but each one is dedicated ultimately to the destruction of all the others. It's the triumphant validation of the individual taken to a wild extreme.
There can be only one.
The movie's tagline quickly becomes an ever-present catchphrase. Clearly, though, there can be quite a lot more than one. The Ator series, Sea of Cave Dwellers, saw a fourth entry last year, and Deathstalker, another Conan imitator many times removed, sees a third. Deathstalker and the Warriors from Hell, episode 703. The burdensome title already gives us an indication of the problem. We've been through this with the sword and sorcery so many times that its sheer weight has bogged us down. Each iteration has featured a different actor in the eponymous role, and let's be aware, Deathstalker, the word that has driven all three films, is just our hero's nom de guerre, a consequence of his reputation as a daring adventurer.
Deathstalker!
His lady Evie wonders in Deathstalker 2.
That's your first name or your last name?
In a likely nod to the Mongol Empire and the predilections of Genghis Khan, the Deathstalker movies feature wall-to-wall sexual exploitation. The women of the realm are at constant risk of being groped, abducted, and violated by the drunken thugs, and have not much defense aside from Deathstalker's chivalry and courage. Once they've been rescued, Deathstalker then treats them not much better than their assailants did. Much of this is clearly a financial decision. All three movies rely heavily on the tropes of sex comedy and softcore pornography. There are many thongs, topless shots, and mud wrestling bouts meant to make the films more marketable. But the end result is a world so hostile to women that their identities seem always vulnerable to dissolution. Princess Evie has in fact been cloned for malevolent purposes, this being an 8th level magic user spell in D&D. While Deathstalker's lady person in Deathstalker and the Warriors from Hell takes the form of twins. Princess Carissa, who's murdered in the film's first reel, and identical sister Elizina, who takes her place so effortlessly as to make her death seem inconsequential, as though it had barely happened at all. The Warriors from Hell are Paris adventurers brought back to life by the malevolent wizard Troxardus to track Deathstalker down. Here's the theme of voodoo again, only this time transplanted to a medieval milieu. The D&D Player's Handbook makes a vital distinction between Resurrection, a 7th level clerical spell that brings the character back to life as though she had never died to begin with, and Raise Dead, a 5th level spell that merely reanimates corpses. The resulting zombies do their summoner's bidding, but little remains of their previous selves. Troxardus combines these two. The Hell Warriors remember who they were and spend their leisure time reminiscing about their former lives. Meanwhile, though, they feel Troxardus' influence as though it were being transmitted into their minds by radio. Gragas, one of the better-spoken Hell Warriors, lays it out for Deathstalker.
It's not so bad. You know, for some of us, it's like a second chance at life. But some of the others, though, they've been dead for a long time, and they liked it that way. It's not so much fun for them.
Our souls.
Yeah, he's got them sealed up in a jar back at the castle. And while he's got them, we're forced to do his bidding.
A few details have been fiddled with around the edges, but we're basically back in Bridey Murphy's universe here, with the regressed subject whose regression has forced him to confront his previous existences. In Bridey, we recall, the social sciences granted us access to this unearthly realm between lives. Maury Bernstein, a gifted hypnotist at a time when hypnotism still had some scientific cachet, sent Virginia Tighe back to the moment of her birth, and then, still curious beyond this, to her previous incarnations. Now, in today's post-Tolkien, late Excalibur idiom, these spiritual transformations are back to being practiced by witchcraft. Scampy Matthew Broderick did a turn on the sword and sandal circuit 3 years ago with Lady Hawk, Richard Donner's chance to cross blades with the medieval craze. Here, Broderick hones a fourth-wall-breaking performance he would parlay into legend the following year in Ferris Bueller's Day Off, a movie in which he plays a truant who drags two dependent peers into a nightmare of anarchy and crime. In Lady Hawk, he keeps looking to the camera to discharge clever one-liners or making odd offhand comments to no one in particular. When we first meet him, he's clawing his way through an earthen wall, and we don't even know who he is at first. All we see is his grubby, clutching arm. At last, his cherubic face pops through, streaked with grime.
It's not unlike escaping mother's womb.
He wisecracks.
God, what a memory.
Here again, we're reminded of Bridey Murphy's curious world, where the miracle of birth can be consciously recalled on course to reconnecting with past lives. Broderick's character Gaston is breaking out of a dungeon by way of the city sewers when he says this, and he returns to these same sewers later in the film. And here again, we recall the descending reorientation of the dominant zeitgeist over the last few decades. From Pilatre and Darlan's hot air balloon and the Duchess's soaring aspirations, we've come at last, via the space program perhaps, to a place where heroes fight not to escape gravity, but just to climb out of the boiler rooms and sewers. A few decades ago, such a claim might have been made in earnest, but these are sardonic days. And when Gaston says he remembers the experience of being born, he's clearly joking. Bikinis have been in style, more or less, since where the boys are, but they're enjoying a mini renaissance in the late 80s. The Florida and California coasts still play their curious twin role in helping constitute the American identity, being at once coveted vacation spots and hubs for narcotics and human trafficking. The more conservative drug war dramas of the recent past, Weekend with the Babysitter and Mitchell in particular, either elide or exaggerate the allegedly sexy aspects of life on the two coasts, having a dozen years earlier secured stunning Linda Evans, who even now is lounging around the pool in Dynasty. The team behind Mitchell cast her as the most modestly dressed call girl in movies, and instead gave Joe Don Baker all the screen time. Weekend with the Babysitter, on the other hand, has lots of young women in revealing garb. The hero's minor daughter, for example, who's drifting away into a life of crime, and his mistress, who has him ensnared in a blackmail scheme. Of late, the prudery and shame have subsided, and today's airwaves are replete with guilt-free eye candy. From Miami Vice to T.J. Hooker, popular TV's fixation on drugs, wealth, and corruption means more glimpses of college-age ladies lounging on the decks of rich men's yachts, strolling along the beaches and boardwalks, dancing their cares away, all with nary a stitch on. California rock band Van Halen has also had a lot to do with the resurgent popularity of the fun-loving bikini. And if you factor in the CBS mega-hit Magnum P.I., all three provinces in the protectorate of Bikinistan, Florida, California, and Hawaii, are represented. Given this resurgence of interest in sun and surf, it's no surprise that men's magazines have become proving grounds for up-and-coming bikini bombshells in movies and television. Linda Evans did a shoot for Playboy, as did Ten and Bolero's Bo Derek. Heather Locklear of T.J. Hooker paid her dues as a pin-up model. In this environment, there's no reason a Sports Illustrated swimsuit icon couldn't get her shot too, which is why this unsunny February sees Kathy Ireland descend on theaters as an alien from L.A., episode 516. This picture has issued from the Golan Globus production company, whose output has a certain eccentric quality. Among the studio's titles, 1985's Life Force, in which humanity battles a hive of psychic alien vampires led by a naked succubus, and the danceploitation pick Breaking 2, Electric Boogaloo. The struggling studio makes some rookie mistakes with Alien from L.A., their most conspicuous being to recruit Ireland, the quintessence of sunny sea and open sky, in a dark Gothic picture that takes place almost entirely below ground. We do get a short oceanside prologue for SI fans, but once her intrepid Wanda plummets down a well into the Earth's core, Jules Verne style, the rest of the picture unfolds in a dank dystopian underworld.
I want to know why. You said I was special. So naturally I want to know
Another
why.
failure, despite what one presumes must have been months of vocal coaching, they've been unable to remedy Ireland's startlingly squeaky speaking voice. She talks in a childlike trebly register that's endearing but simply unsuited to the lead in a feature film. It gets your attention and holds it. You spend the movie half expecting the character Wanda to reveal the voice has all been an act, something she's concocted as a test for her inconstant boyfriend, or a ruse to fool the underground dwellers. It doesn't seem to be, though. Ireland maintains the same manner in other media appearances. Evidently, it's how she really talks. Distracting as Ireland's voice is, the decision to include it may have been more of a miscalculation than an oversight. This is because the ongoing Valley Girl movement has challenged the unspoken social rules governing how mousy and bubbly a young woman's voice can get and still be within the bounds of respectability. As is the way with cultural phenomena of this kind, the concept of a Valley Girl was specific at first. It connoted a particular species of young female Los Angelina who favors shopping over substance. She does this to mask a bottomless underlying vacuity, if you go by the Frank Zappa song of 1982. But according to the movie Valley Girl, released the following year, the Valley Girl has a deep-seated need for emotional fulfillment, so consuming and seemingly hopeless, she must hide it under a superficial veneer. Anyway, by now the term's scope has expanded to both coasts. Cyndi Lauper is alleged to be one, as is Saturday Night Live comedian Victoria Jackson, whose peculiar voice rivals Ireland's. Jackson does break character sometimes and speak normally. This is so rare, though, that one suspects she isn't using her normal voice at all. The squeaky voice is her normal voice, the one she feels more comfortable using, possibly owing to a well-seated defense mechanism or a history of misplaced reinforcement. Her deeper affect is the cultivated one, designed and practiced for those who ask what she normally sounds like. The put-ons and affectations go all the way down, like the layers of an onion. Maybe Golan Globus and Kathy Ireland's team imagined a similar celebrity for her. Alas, Ireland, whose career up to now has required no acting and virtually no public speaking, just doesn't get the same traction Locklear and Linda Evans have. And Alien from L.A. enjoys little commercial or critical success. Like much of Golan Globus's other product, Life Force in particular, Alien from L.A. makes up for its middling acting and writing with semi-respectable special effects. Its undersea kingdom has a shadowy lushness modeled after Ridley Scott's in Alien and Blade Runner. Its locales, costumes, and light effects are sometimes nearly as convincing as the big studio blockbusters. Just as often, the sets are clearly dolled-up gymnasiums and boxing rings, but no matter. The movie's pervasive bias toward the visual rather than the textual and discursive, a bias that was surely instrumental in Ireland's casting to begin with, even pervades the movie's narrative. Screens dotting this dystopian underworld, and not newspapers, transmit pronouncements and updates from a media spokesman for the Atlantean overseers. The costume and makeup departments are fixated on eyes. One of the key villains sports a stylish pirate patch. Another bats superhumanly rich lashes. Everywhere there's hand-wringing over what the Atlanteans have and haven't seen.
Sad, isn't it?
Ireland's Wanda Sacknewsome laments as she and Gus walk through Atlantis City.
I mean, not to have seen blue skies, the sun, the stars, and Malibu Beach.
The movie's principal moment comes thanks to this scopophilic fixation. For the first half of the movie, Wanda makes her way about Atlantis incognito. This isn't natural. She's a person of no standing here, one who, according to official Atlantean records, doesn't exist at all. On the moment, though, she chances to turn whilst stumbling through a maze of hallways. A rubbernecker snaps her picture. The movie here gets uncharacteristically expressionistic, using the camera flash as it dissolves to white, and then to a tight shot on the resulting portrait, blown up and hung on a wall, Antonioni style. Evil General Rykov leans in on the likeness of the fugitive's startled face.
I think I know how to find one,
Says she. At this point, the ambient screens become malevolent for our heroine. The picture goes out over state television and her cover's quickly blown. To director Albert Pune's credit, he has here borrowed tricks from only the best auteurs, now Philip Kaufman, in addition to Antonioni. From the latter, we have the trope of the blown-up photograph. The former gave us this trick of using the white flash to convey an alteration of consciousness or shift in power relations. This happens when the pod people unearth the cowering Matthew Bonnell from under a flight of stairs by shining a flashlight in his face, the moment that spells the end of the human race in Kaufman's invasion of the body snatchers. As is the practice nowadays, Golan Globus have stitched Alien from L.A. together from many other popular movies. Its most conspicuous antecedents, aside from Blade Runner, are familiar by now: Raiders of the Lost Ark and its sequel, Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. The movie does some amazing contortions to reference the Indiana Jones saga, as when surly Gus, Wanda's benefactor, devours a bug-encrusted sandwich, a callback to Temple of Doom's insect banquet. Wanda looks on, weirdly unaffected. As the Eskimo of Western convention has a plenitude of words for snow, the lingo of the Valley Girl abounds in ways to call something gross, which only makes her indifference stand out that much more.
My dad's a professor, Gus,
she says at last, obliquely referencing Indiana Jones's profession.
and I bet he'd really like to study you.
It is as though Beach Party's leering Professor Sutwell had leapfrogged a quarter century and tunneled into the Earth's core. Wanda's friendly enough, but her reaction to Gus's boorish table manners has a certain Sutwellian push and pull to it, a similar tension between cultural revulsion and forbidden intersectional desire. Beach Party's Sutwell pretended to be practicing scientific observation. He was like Diane Fossey, whose recent bestseller has become a movie this year. He nevertheless critiqued the regressive nature of teen dancing, read mating, rituals, a distinctly unanthropological move, and either he or the movie makers used the occasion to string together prurient, fragmented POV shots of the dancers, put through a circular scrim to simulate the view through Sutwell's telescope. Wanda's anthropological moment is much more informal and fleeting, but Albert Pune would seem to want us to see Gus as a romantic interest of sorts, which means her anthropological gaze shares some components of lust with Sutwell's. Like his look, hers is an uneasy amalgam of alleged scientific objectivity with a colonial sense of condescension, all laid over a bedrock of sublimated desire. Anthropology is exactly what's caused all the trouble to begin with. Atlantis' rulers, like the authoritarians of THX 1138, have carefully kept the desperate Atlanteans from learning about the surface world. Per Saknussemm's arrival in Atlantis, done in the name of cultural curiosity, has already threatened to screw all this up. And as Wanda arrives, the ubiquitous televisions are busy laying the resultant murmurings to rest.
Lord Over has issued a statement which reminds citizens of Atlantis that there is no such thing as a surface world, and rumors of the actual existence of aliens are wrong, misleading, and counterproductive to the future of our great city-state. Anyone who thinks they may have had contact with an alien, female or older male, should report immediately to General Rykov at Government House. There is a reward. And finally, the statement stresses, once and for all, aliens do not exist, the surface world does not exist, and Wanda Saknussem is a mere figment of your imagination.
It's odd that Atlantis would have so little apparatus in place to deal with otherworlders, because parts of it feel a lot like an airport or some other sort of transit station. There's plenty of shopping, though here it's mostly a subterranean variety of street barter. The underground city is a hurly-burly of travelers rushing this way and that on their way to vague destinations. As travelers do at airports, the Atlanteans here sport a variety of looks and backgrounds.
Why does everyone wear funny makeup and weird clothes?
Wanda asks Gus, an interesting question on a number of levels. And there's the matter of these ever-present screens, like the public address systems at airports that broadcast announcements, and more the unending drone of cable news. We're back in the dystopia of War of the Lost World again. Recall its airport-style central complex and continuous motivational public address system. Like Prosser, General Rykov relies on an uneasy balance between borders and diversity to keep her grip on power. The various serfs must be allowed to conduct commerce so they can generate wealth for Rykov and her mafia gang to seize. On the other hand, any inquiry into the other threatens to upset this balance and destabilize the regime. Thus, the despot's tolerance of commerce and diversity must be kept within carefully considered limits. This is the key problem for any junta, really, this proper balance of inclusion and exclusion, carrot and stick. Over time, such a path must lead to proper governance. However corrupt the city planners are, they still must facilitate some minimum threshold of functioning civil society before they can prosper personally. Wanda's picture disrupts this balance. Rykov thinks she's struck a clever blow for border enforcement by releasing it to the public, and it does in fact provoke the greedy Atlanteans to turn on Wanda for want of that sweet reward money. It also causes them to turn on each other, though. This sows more general discontent, which is usually, though not always, a pesky problem for an authoritarian. Worse, Wanda's picture inflames rumors about the supposed surface world, and as the movie progresses, the televised denials of this realm's existence grow ever more nervously insistent. By the end credits, Rykov's hold on Atlantis is weakened considerably. Hence, at last, their only remaining recourse is to desperately insist she is a mere fragment of the Atlanteans' imagination. There's a further political dimension to the photograph, too. It catches Wanda in three-quarter profile, wide-eyed and frightened, victim of some unseen persecution. Admittedly, Rykov's regime makes few bones about its repressive approach to law enforcement. The media spokesman openly, even cheerfully, lists the many minor civil infractions that are here punishable by death. Still, it's one thing to have this put to you in a placating public service announcement. It's another to see the face of someone hunted by this authoritarian regime, harried, frozen in terror. Ireland's acting range doesn't quite extend as far as true terror, but this is plainly the desired effect. The picture is for Atlanteans what the picture of the weeping student at the Kent State Massacre became for us surface dwellers. Soon it's all over the place, everyone knows about it, and it's raising questions about leadership. There's a whiff of revolution in the air. In other words, the photograph has transcended Wanda, or Ireland, its literal subject, and entered an elite class of iconic images. It has surpassed the individual circumstance that produced it. It no longer speaks of that single character or of those characters, but expresses concepts. Examples of such world-changing photos abound. The author Umberto Eco discusses the famous and famously staged Iwo Jima flag raising, and the blue marble image from the Apollo moon landing is often mentioned. Such photographs, for a civilization now accustomed to thinking in images, transcend the description of a single event to become what Eco calls arguments, or maybe mute, vivid persuasions. The stacks of concentration camp victims persuade the global community that world war can be just. The space shuttle explosion dispels fundamental illusions about technology and aspiration, which offer less solace from the horror of mortality than we've been led to imagine. Such is the effect this little snapshot of a startled Wanda has had on the Atlantean people. The trick of using media within media to propel narrative has been around a long time, and as the media have proliferated, the trick has developed more variations. Once, we simply had bank robbers who followed the news of their own pursuit by listening to the radios in their getaway cars. Consider the faceless infamy of Hal Moffat and the brute man who has never been photographed and so can only be conjured on radio broadcast via witness description. Soon this becomes the visual fame of Vince Potter in Invasion USA, who spends the apocalypse going back and forth between the TV station and the local bar. The Beatniks' Eddie becomes a radio singing star, but the resulting chaos consumes him. Vicky of the Deadly Bees faints before a monstrous television camera, and the shipwrecked astronaut of Stranded in Space falls through television into another dimension. City on Fires, 1979 K-16, drunken anchorwoman Maggie watches her city burn as her visible intoxication being broadcast everywhere compounds the general mood of panic. Over time, the stories movies tell revolve around media more and more, which only stands to reason since new media are in the meantime being invented and becoming popular. The psychic and emotional interrelations between these movies' characters and the media making them famous have gotten more complicated too, and by now, with the likes of Alien from L.A. and last year's Adventures in Babysitting, they've grown positively confounding. Kathy Ireland, a real centerfold, plays a character made famous in a forbidden realm via a Polaroid snapshot. Elizabeth Shue, typecast as the girl next door, plays a character made famous in a forbidden realm via a fake centerfold. The mind reels. No wonder Neil Postman's so pissed. No wonder Don DeLillo likens the media to a toxic airborne event. This winter, media professor Mark Crispin Miller adds Boxed In, the Culture of TV, to the growing list of nonfiction titles to attack the popular arts. Where Gerrymander only watched fleeting moments of TV with great effort, though, speaking instead of the medium in the abstract, Miller puts great effort into watching TV. In Boxed In's broad-ranging articles, he devotes hundreds of words to describing Jerry Lewis's manic demeanor. He spends whole pages examining episodes of Family Feud in isolation. He methodically dissects the royal wedding of Charles and Lady Di. He opens up the lens, if you will, of the cultural critical instrument focused on popular entertainment, and if the metaphor here seems reflexive, that's part of the point. Much conceptual ground has been lost to the mass media in just a few years since Four Arguments and Plug-in Drug. Criticism from without, from the sociological vantage of Marie Wynne or Gerrymander's Emersonian perspective, feels less tenable. If it's to be critiqued at all, TV must be critiqued from within. Though still polemical, Miller doesn't often trouble to demand FCC reform, greater industry regulation, informed parental involvement, or similar prescriptions. Boxed In is more of a bitter lament than a call to arms. The battle's already been lost. Miller expresses a preference for the written word over the image, while acknowledging that the latter has won out over the former. By now it feels redundant to point out that watching has supplanted reading. In any case, the insidious big money media have started incorporating these critiques into their own fictions, as we see if we recall the Clippers and their rivals from City Limits. In their ongoing negotiations over turf, these two warring gangs have occasion to haggle over a rare comic book.
Insect Man number 47.
They dispute the meaning of a line from the graphic novel about
an eye for an eye.
The irony being that they don't know it was originally from the Bible. And there's a good chance they don't know about the Bible at all. The White Hat Gang from The Side Hackers, 1969, episode 202, ruminated over this same line 20 years prior when hero biker JC held it up against the contrasting biblical sentiment to
turn the other cheek.
JC and his companion, who's at a loss to explain the discrepancy, have either forgotten or never knew about the distinction between the Old Testament and the New, and so are unaware that the latter tends to be gentler in tone. By the 1980s, it's easy to imagine a generation for whom the Bible, and by extension the bulk of Western literary tradition, is moribund altogether. All that remains are fragments of aphorisms, and even these must be cataloged in unrelated picture books if they're to gain any cultural currency. This Thanksgiving, a zero-budget experimental TV program called Mystery Science Theater 3000 debuts on KTMA, a small independent station in Minneapolis, St. Paul. The tricky premise has three shapes at the bottom of the TV screen who watch a show within a show, typical matinee Sunday or late-night U.H.F. fare, along with the audience. Creator Joel Hodgson has long had a gift for prop humor and performance art, enough to have won guest appearances on Late Night with David Letterman. MST3000 is a product of its time, like a tidy collision of boxed in, the culture of TV, with Hobgoblins. On the one hand, Harebrained Productions, its tiny production company, holds little regard for the movies up for review. Yes, the giant turtle movies are hokey. On the other hand, MST3000 looks pretty chintzy too, and though the host Joel Robinson and his two toy robots are allegedly being held prisoner, they don't seem that upset about it. They make snide comments about the movies, but they never actually get that angry. Like Boxed In, MST3000 mounts its critique of media from within. As in Hobgoblins and MST3000, the relationship between human consciousness and media is a captive one, and one that hovers uneasily between suffering and pleasure. The first 3 episodes of MST3000 are movie-length distillations of a pair of Jerry and Sylvia Anderson supermarionation extravaganzas. Stingray in the aforementioned Captain Scarlet and the Mysterons, and a Japanese Star Wars imitator. MST3000 then dives deep into the Gamera legend, featuring 4 movies in a row. The original alongside his bouts with Baragon, Gauss, and Zegra. To close out the year, KTMA does a Melon Drop New Year's Eve comedy routine that resembles Amazon Women on the Moon and Hollywood Shuffle. That chilly night, the handful of MST3000 fans in Minneapolis, St. Paul must be wondering if the show is going to feature nothing but Gamera movies from here on in.
Well, that started when I was 10 years
Wait a
old.
second.
What?
Is that really your voice?